All right, it's February 27th, 2026. Looking at today's intelligence, there's a really interesting theme weaving through everything. State authority is being tested, and I mean from all sides. We're talking courts, regulators, citizen groups. They're all pushing back, and in some pretty major ways. So let's get right into it.
Okay, here's our operational roadmap for today. We're kicking things off with a pretty big showdown between the Supreme Court and the NCERT. Then, we'll cover new rights for air travelers, some big new rules from the RBI on prop trading, and an important take on AI and employment. And of course, we'll finish up with the market close.
All right, let's jump into our lead story. There's a serious clash escalating between the Supreme Court and, believe it or not, the country's main education establishment.
So here's what's happening. The Supreme Court has done something you really don't see every day. They banned a Class 8 textbook and ordered every copy seized right now. And what's the big deal? Well, it's a section in the book that talks about judicial corruption. The court isn't just seeing this as some minor mistake. No, they're calling it a very, very calculated move, their words, to basically poison young minds against the entire justice system. And the court's reaction? It's been incredibly strong. The Chief Justice of India, Surya Kant, has actually started contempt action and said, and I quote, "Heads must roll." I mean, wow. You just don't hear language like that coming from the highest court. It tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they're taking this. Now, you might think an apology would smooth things over. The government's top law officer gave what he called an unconditional and unqualified apology. But the court, they're not having it. They've signaled that an apology just isn't going to cut it this time. They want a deeper probe to get to the bottom of who's behind this. That tells you they think this is a systemic issue, not just a one-off mistake.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Macro Politics and Governance. We've got 4 key updates here for you, all touching on regulation, federal friction, and some serious policy pressure.
First up, some really good news if you travel by air. The DGCA, India's aviation regulator, just made a big change. You know that 24-hour window you had to cancel or change a flight for free? Well, they've just doubled it. That's right, you now have a full 48 hours. It's a pretty clear move to give passengers a little more power. But there are a few conditions you need to know about. This new rule only works if you book your tickets directly from the airline's website. Also, you have to book at least 7 days ahead for a domestic flight or 15 days for an international one. And here's another really important part. The airlines themselves are now responsible for all refunds. So even if you book through a travel site, the airline is the one you go to. That's a big shift.
Next, we're watching some serious friction brewing between states. There's a standoff between the police forces of Delhi and Himachal Pradesh over some arrests, and it's quickly turning into a political firestorm. You've got Himachal's chief minister saying the arrests might not even be legal, and the opposition is throwing around terms like a serious constitutional crisis. So yeah, this is one to watch.
Okay, this next number is pretty sobering. 66. That's how many inmates have died in Chhattisgarh jails in just the past year. As you can imagine, this has caused a huge uproar in the state assembly. The opposition actually walked out and is now demanding a full-scale investigation into the conditions inside these prisons.
And to round out this section, a major farmers group, the Samyuk Kisan Morcha, is launching a big pressure campaign. Their strategy is pretty clever. They're pushing individual state governments to pass resolutions against the central government's policies. So what are they asking for? Well, they want to scrap the India-US trade agreement, repeal a major employment act, get rid of the new labor codes, and bring back the old MGNREGA program.
Okay, let's shift gears to corporate and business intelligence. We're seeing some significant regulatory moves here that are really starting to shake up the finance and tech sectors.
So the RBI is putting some new rules in place for proprietary trading. That's basically when banks use their own money to make trades for their own profit. From April 1st, they're going to need to put up more collateral. Now, at least 50% of that has to be in cash. But here's the interesting twist. For the other 50%, domestic firms have to use specific Indian securities. Foreign firms, they might get to use something called a standby letter of credit. Think of it as a guarantee from a huge international bank. And that little difference could give them a major competitive advantage, a lot more flexibility than their Indian counterparts. And believe me, the market is noticing. We're hearing warnings from some traders that these new rules could potentially tank trading volumes by up to 30%. Yeah, 30%. That is a massive potential shock to the system. So everyone's got their eyes on this one.
At the same time, SEBI, the market regulator, is overhauling the mutual fund space. And the reason is actually pretty simple. They want to stop all these funds from looking and feeling the same. So, they're capping how much overlap portfolios can have, getting rid of some older scheme types, and bringing in new ones like life cycle funds. They're even changing how gold funds are benchmarked. It's all about making sure that when you, the investor, choose a fund, you're getting something genuinely distinct.
Now, for this next story, I want you to just think about this one number for a second. 854 million. That is roughly how many people in India are on WhatsApp. It's just staggering. And it's why this news is so important. After a really long battle with the Competition Commission, Meta has finally caved and agreed to give users more control over their privacy and data. Given that user base, this is a truly massive deal.
Okay, time for our Editorial Digest. Today, we're looking at a piece by Sudipto Mandal, and he's tackling a huge question, really one of the biggest questions we're all facing. What does artificial intelligence mean for India's job market?
Mandal kicks things off by defining something he calls the growth paradox. It's this puzzle that's been around for a while in India. The economy grows like crazy, but unemployment grows right alongside it. The jobs just aren't keeping pace. And his whole point is that AI is about to throw a massive wrench into this already complicated problem, forcing us to rethink everything.
And to show just how urgent this is, he brings in a quote from the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, and she says, AI will affect 40% of jobs globally. Let that sink in, 40%. We're not talking about something that's decades away. This is a huge disruption that's happening right now.
So what do we do about it? Well, Mandal's strategy is pretty clear-headed. He says we need to focus on two things, but in a specific order. Priority number one, go all in on sectors that hire a lot of people right now, like construction and manufacturing. These jobs match the skills our workforce currently has. Yes, he says, we absolutely need to skill people up for the high-tech jobs of the future, but that's priority number two. The immediate crisis is getting jobs for the millions who are here today.
All right, let's wrap up with a look at the market close with the verified numbers for February 27th.
So it was a pretty flat day on the indexes. The Sensex nudged up just 27 points to finish at 82,248.63. And the Nifty 50 was up about 14 points, closing at 25,496.55. Over in currencies, the rupee was pretty much flat against the US dollar at 90.92, but it did weaken a bit against the euro, closing at 107.27. Really, the main story today was in oil, which shot up over $1, closing at $70.57 a barrel.
And that brings us back to where we started. Across the board today, we've seen courts, regulators, and citizen groups all pushing the boundaries, all testing the limits of state power, which leaves us with a really important question to think about. Where is the next major point of friction going to come from?